The forest kingdom breathes in silence. Welcome to Fantasy Journeys. Chapter 3. A Valley That Holds Its Breath. The steps were not stairs. That distinction mattered, though Lira couldn't immediately explain why. Stairs were constructed to a purpose, measured, regularized, imposed on a slope by someone who had decided the slope needed to be managed. These were something else. The stone here had fractured naturally along horizontal planes, the way certain rock did under the pressure of water moving through it over long periods, and what remained were ledges, each between 8 and 14 inches high, each angled very slightly inward to shed rain. They varied in depth and in width. Some were broad enough to stand on comfortably. Others were the width of a single foot. They were not consistent. They were, however, continuous, each one present exactly where the body expected to find the next, so that the descent happened almost without thought, the way descending a familiar hillside happened without thought. Someone had used these steps long enough that use itself had become a kind of design. Lira moved down with her right hand, trailing the rock face beside her, not for balance, but for contact. The stone was cool and slightly rough under her fingertips, with the specific texture of granite that had been wet for an extended period. Somewhere in the grain of it, she could feel the faint vibration of the water below, conducted up through solid rock, the way sound conducted through a wall. She pressed her palm flat and felt it more clearly. 3 distinct rhythms, each at a different frequency, all continuous. Fen descended behind her with careful small steps, nose nearly at Lira's shoulder. The mare's breath was warm against the back of her neck at irregular intervals. Cael was already 6 steps ahead, leading the bay with a loose rein, moving at the speed of someone who had decided to trust the ground and was allowing that trust to carry them. He had not looked back since they began the descent. He was watching the valley unfold below. Lira watched it too. It came in layers, the way the light had come in layers, the way the sound of water had arrived before she'd consciously registered it. First, more stone, pale limestone shelves extending outward from the cliff face in wide horizontal bands, each one dark at its inner edge where moisture collected and light did not reach, pale at its outer edge where something grew in the thin soil that had accumulated there over centuries. Low plants, green so dark they were nearly black. She couldn't see them well enough to name them. Then the canopy of the valley itself, which was not a single canopy, but several, at different heights, creating the layered filtration of light she had noticed above, but which here was more complete and more complex. A dozen distinct grades of green overhead, from the pale yellow-green of new growth at the very top to the deep blue-green of the oldest tiers below, and somewhere in that layering a quality of illumination that had nothing to do with any direction. The light was simply present, distributed, equal. It reminded her of a word she had come across in a technical treatise on optical phenomena and never found occasion to use: isotropic. Light that arrived from no particular source, because it had been scattered so thoroughly it had forgotten where it started. Then the water. She heard the lowest register before she saw its source. the deep resonance she had felt in her sternum on the plateau above. It revealed itself as a wide, flat-moving channel cut into the valley floor, perhaps 30 feet across, running at a pace so slow the surface appeared almost still. Almost. If she fixed her eyes on a point on the surface and watched it, the movement was perceptible, a continuous, unhurried passage, the whole width of the channel moving as one body without turbulence or variation. The color of it in this light was grey-green, a tone she had never seen in water before. It looked, she thought, less like water and more like the memory of water. The mid-register was a narrower channel, elevated. She could see it now, running along a shelf of rock some 20 feet above the valley floor, contained within a cut no wider than her forearm. It moved faster than the lower channel, and the sound of it was cleaner, lighter. Below, where it dropped off the shelf's edge, it fell in a thin curtain that caught the isotropic light and held it for the brief moment of its falling. The highest register she could not yet see, but she could trace its sound to a point somewhere to the north and above, a brightness of pitch that moved through the lower sounds, the way a single instrument moved through a chord, distinct but not separable. She marked its direction and continued down. The final steps brought them onto the valley floor itself. The ground here was not the moss carpet of the plateau above, but something denser, a living surface of low plants intermixed with a fine soil that had the consistency and color of dark bread. It gave underfoot in a way that was different from the moss above, more substantial, more ancient. She pressed her boot down and felt several inches of give, and when she lifted her foot, she could hear the sound of the ground resettling, a small sound, like a sigh. Fen put her nose to it and inhaled for a long time. Cael had stopped at the edge of the wide, flat channel and was looking at it with his arms at his sides, which was his posture for things he was trying to understand without yet asking anything about them. His horse stood behind him and drank from a smaller pool where the channel met a natural outcrop and spilled sideways into a shallow basin. The sound of him drinking was loud and ordinary in this quiet space. Lira was glad of it. She came to stand beside Cael. Up close, the channel was not natural. She had suspected this from above, but proximity confirmed it. The edges were too clean, not the rough fracture lines of stone broken by water over time, but the straight, deliberate edges of stone shaped by hand. Not recently shaped. The tool marks were centuries old, smoothed over by water and by growth, lichen colonizing the cut surfaces until the lichen itself had become part of the structure. But underneath it, visible in the places where the lichen had not fully established, the lines were straight. The depth was consistent. Someone had cut this channel to an exact specification and maintained it long enough that the maintenance had become indistinguishable from nature. "This isn't a river," Cael said. "No," Lira agreed. "It runs the wrong way for the valley's slope." He said this without emphasis, the way he said anything he was observing rather than concluding. Rivers flow with the slope. This one. He pointed to the far end of the channel, where it disappeared around a gentle curve into the trees. "It's moving across, not down." She looked. He was right. The water moved laterally, neither toward nor away from the valley's lowest point, but along a contour line. To maintain that, someone had cut the channel bed to a precise gradient, a gradient calibrated not by the valley's natural topography, but by the intended path of the water, which meant not just that someone had built this channel, but that someone had planned where the water would go and had modified the ground to send it there. She thought of the map. In the personal notation section, the 3 phrases arranged in a triangle. She had read them as descriptions of 3 separate water features. She was now wondering if they were descriptions of a single system, seen from 3 different points within it. "How old do you think it is?" she asked. Cael crouched beside the channel and placed his hand flat on the cut stone, the way he had placed his fingers in the moss on the plateau. He held it there for a moment. "Old," he said, "but used." He moved his hand slightly. "The stone's been worn by water that ran in the same place for a very long time, but it's not silted, not blocked. Whatever moves through here regularly." He stood. "Either it maintains itself, or..." He didn't finish the sentence. She understood why. The alternative required saying that someone had done this recently enough that the channels still ran clear, still carried water in the right direction, still functioned as designed, and that someone was not here, was not visible, had left no evidence of themselves except the channels themselves, clean and continuous and precisely maintained. Lira unstopped her canteen and crouched at the edge of the channel. The water was very clear. She could see the bottom, smooth stone, no silt, occasional dark spots where something grew. She dipped the canteen, and the water was cold in a way that surprised her. Not the ambient cold of the valley, which was cool and pleasant. Colder than that. The water carried its chill from somewhere above the valley, from inside stone, from depth, from a source that did not warm on its way down. She drank. It tasted of nothing except cold and a faint mineral quality that was not unpleasant. The taste of water that had been in contact with very old limestone for a very long time. Cael took the canteen from her and drank in his turn, then handed it back and stood looking up the valley's northern slope. She followed his gaze. The trees there were different. She had registered this peripherally on the descent, but not examined it directly. The broad-trunked elder growth of the forest above continued here, but among it and between it were structures, not ruins. She corrected herself immediately, because the word ruin carried implications that these did not deserve. Stone forms that rose from the valley floor and continued upward, integrated into the living trees, in a way that made the boundary between construction and growth impossible to determine precisely. A tower, if it was a tower, if that word applied, grew from the living rock of the cliff face in a way that suggested the cliff face and the tower had reached their current relationship over the same centuries, neither imposing on the other, both simply continuing in proximity. A bridge. She recognized the form, an arch, stone, spanning a narrowing in the wide flat channel at a point perhaps 100 feet upstream. But the bridge's edges had been colonized by the same dark green low plants she had seen on the limestone shelves above, and from its underside, where the arch curved over the water, something grew downward in long pale tendrils that just touched the surface. More than one bridge. She could see the curve of a second arch through the trees, and something that might be a third, or might be a natural formation. In this light, in this place, the distinction felt less important than it should have. Cael's hand was in his coat pocket. He was pressing something between his fingers. She could see the movement in his forearm, and she knew without looking that he was handling one of the leaves from his journal's pressed collection. He did that when he was thinking. She had never mentioned it, and she didn't mention it now. "The map," he said. She pulled it out. In the personal notation, the central blank space, she had been thinking of it as the center of the triangle formed by the three water phrases. She looked at it now with the valley in front of her, and the channel at her feet, and the structures in the trees to the north. The blank space was not absence. It was the place where the cartographer had stood when they made this map. You didn't draw the place you were standing. You drew what was around you. The center was where they were. The blank space was the vantage point. Inside the blank space, very faint, nearly invisible against the aged paper, was a mark she had not seen under the archive's lantern light or in the variable light of the past 4 days on the road. She needed the lens. She brought it to the map and looked. A second leaf, smaller than the one in the corner, the same 5 fine lines radiating from a central stem, but drawn at a slightly different angle, not decorative, not symmetrical with the first. Positioned, placed in the blank space, the way you placed yourself in a landscape, with intention, facing something. She lowered the lens and looked at the valley around them, then back at the map. The leaf in the blank space was oriented toward the northern slope, toward the structures in the trees. She had the sudden clear sensation of someone pointing, not urgently, not dramatically, the way a person who had lived somewhere for a very long time might point, patient, certain, assuming you had all the time you needed to look where they were directing you. From the north, carried on the valley's contained air, she heard a new sound, not water this time, but something slower, a rhythmic, soft percussion, regular as a heartbeat, deliberate as work, something striking stone at measured intervals, pausing, striking again, not falling water, not shifting rock, something intentional. Fen raised her head and looked north, ears forward, nostrils working. She did not move toward it. She did not move away. She simply looked, with the large, interested attention of an animal that had decided something was worth watching. Lira looked too, between the broad trunks and the integrated towers, in the direction the leaf on the map was pointing, the movement of a figure, slow, unhurried, entirely unconcerned, bending and straightening, working at the edge of the elevated channel, with the focused ease of someone performing a task they had performed so many times it had become indistinguishable from rest. The sound of stone on stone continued, patient and even. Cael said nothing. Lira said nothing. The valley held its breath, and in the center of its holding, someone tended the water channels, as they had apparently been tending them for a very long time, without alarm, without acknowledgement, in the deep and ordinary silence of a place that had chosen exactly this.